Hey y'all, Scott here. Let's rank our cousins. Well, Betty stinks. That's great, that man was born to be a cousin. Gary, not worth the hype. Jeremiah, the definitive cousin experience. See, I am completely unbiased when it comes to critiques. If I can name my cousin Betty, surely you can take my opinion on the Virtual Boy to heart. Oh my god! Nintendo is guilty of creating some of the most beloved and iconic video games and video game platforms of all time. Even though nearly all of the PlayStations outsold it, that original NES will forever be more widely recognized as video game. They have the biggest war chest of the most quintessential characters of all time, an ashtray of characters they'll never use again. And the games they make can be masterclasses of design. They appeal to damn near everybody, and most will forever hold the test of time. They also made this fucking thing. This is the Nintendo Virtual Boy, one of their biggest mistakes outside of not naming it Stinky Stinky Mr. Fuck. See, Nintendo has this lineage of iconic failures, the Nintendo 64 DD, the Game Boy Micro, the Wii U, but none can compare to the Virtual Boy. At least with the 64 DD, that was just an add-on exclusive to Japan. The Game Boy Micro was just a variant of the Game Boy Advance. The Wii U outsold Sweden. But the Virtual Boy was different. It was its own platform. It was its own entirely unique creature. It had its own games, its own style, and it couldn't even outsell Maine. Let's head back to a simpler time, before my conception. Nintendo was king. The Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System were at the top of both of their respective generations. They were dominating the handheld world with the Game Boy, and things were looking up for them as they were heading into the era of their next console. Sure, competitors like Sega put up quite a fight and proved that Nintendo couldn't just rest on their laurels, but when all was said and done, Nintendo still reigned supreme. But what do you do when your next child is taking longer than expected to conceive? Have one in the meantime. Nintendo's next system, the Nintendo 64, then named the Nintendo Ultra 64, was taking a while to come out. Sega released their next generation console, the Sega Saturn, in 1994, alongside newcomer Sony's PlayStation, and don't get me started on the slew of nobodies trying to be the next big thing. Looking back at my high school yearbook, oh my god, there was a 3DO? Everybody was releasing their next generation system around this time. But then there was Nintendo. The 64 ended up releasing in 1996. Jesus, you know, this brand new system is getting delayed left and right. These other guys are making us look weak in comparison with their shiny new consoles. We gotta just throw something at the wall, see what sticks. Well, that doesn't. At this time, Nintendo was already experimenting with a new display technology, allowing for 3D visuals, not necessarily this 3D, but this 3D. Showcasing varying degrees of depth and featuring head tracking abilities, it was pitched to Nintendo by the company Reflection Technology after Sega turned them down. Now, why was this technology not appealing to Sega? It only displayed the colors red and black, and they were pretty sure this was going to make the nation motion sick. Now, Nintendo, they didn't give a shit. They saw potential in this tech and partnered with the company to potentially develop it into a consumer product. The head of this whole endeavor was Nintendo's beloved Gunpei Yokoi, an employee who was with Nintendo ever since 1965. This man was the embodiment of Nintendo's key design philosophies. He loved taking weaker hardware and making something special out of it. His talent could be seen within the toys Nintendo made, their games, consoles, and the influence he had on the company has and will forever live with them, even after his departure from the company in 96 and eventual death in 97. He found the 3D screen technology in this VR headset type thing to have loads of potential. This could make Nintendo stick out that much more in gaming. And thus, the project, codenamed VR32, was kicked into production. And over the course of 4 years, Nintendo chipped away at development. However, the device was consistently being stripped down for cost-cutting and health concerns. While a color screen would have been possible, it would have made the Virtual Boy cost over $500. I spent $6 on mine. So, red and black will do. It was perfect, affordable and ugly. Head tracking was proposed via the initial pitch, but was thrown to the side in favor of, I don't know, chopsticks? Motion sickness was a big concern. Making sure children could see after playing one of these things was generally not frowned upon. The device was originally set to be similar in design to modern-day VR headsets. I mean, head tracking, potentially a color screen. But the original and/or best vision was consistently whittled down until we got this. All because Nintendo wanted something cheap and something that wouldn't get them sued. And they still got none of that. Nintendo started to discuss VR32 via Nintendo Power magazines and press releases, eventually giving it the name Virtual Boy in late 1994, showing it off publicly for the first time at the Shoshinkai Software Exhibition in Japan. This was an expo Nintendo held that eventually was renamed to Space World, where Nintendo would talk to the press about their feelings. That, of course, involved game and console showcases, basically what Nintendo had planned for the near future, and the 1994 show was all about Virtual Boys. Well, I misread that. Nintendo's then president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, stood proudly and unveiled the future of his company. Oh, you don't even know what what it is! Keep in mind, prior to this, rumors of Nintendo's revolutionary take on virtual reality were constant. People were expecting to be blown away. What they got, just straight blue. Power-wise, it was 32 bits, which the Super Nintendo was 16, and their next home console was 64, so take that as you will. But the decision to make the display limited to red and black, I mean, you could get away with something like that on the Game Boy. That handheld was 5 years old at this point, and it wasn't meant to be cutting edge or about the graphics. It was meant to give you something to do in the car. The Virtual Boy's entire thing was its graphical capabilities. It was supposed to wow you with its immersion, or at least that's what Nintendo's marketing wanted you to think. Virtual reality was the term constantly coined. Virtual Boy will transport players into a virtual utopia with sights and sounds unlike anything they've ever experienced. You know, drugs are a safer option. Turned out Virtual Boy was far less virtual reality than Nintendo was letting on. When I think VR, this comes to mind, feeling like I am truly in the game world. I move my head in real life, I move my head in the game. Attendees at the show were puzzled by the lack of head tracking and the use of simple red and black visuals. Units at the show were using AC adapters, so it wasn't like you could walk around with this thing on, living the rest of your life in Space Pinball. Only 3 games were on display at the event: Teleroboxer, Mario Bros. VB, and Space Pinball. These games didn't necessarily show off Virtual Boy in the greatest light. They were perfectly playable games, nothing inherently wrong with them, but they weren't drawing anybody in. They didn't validate what was going on here. Teleroboxer was pretty much a clone of Nintendo's Punch-Out series. Mario Bros. VB was just Mario Bros. Everybody's played that at this point. In Space Pinball, my god, that is the last place I'd want to play. These were games that would work perfectly on the Game Boy, NES, SNES, Nintendo 64. If you're gonna have this giant muffler on sticks, these better be games that couldn't play any other way. At the end of the day, attendees discovered Virtual Boy was pretty much just a Viewmaster for video games. Yeah, remember this thing? It was Burglar's favorite toy. Damn it. Basically, a little headset where you insert these special photo reels, look into it, and bam, you're viewing 3D images. Never really occurred to me that these were 3D images as a kid. I just thought this was a stupid way to look at pictures. But looking at them now, I can see so much depth. It's like the background is really in the background. So, take everything about this right down to the design and play a video game on it. Didn't matter, fans were still interested. Nintendo, I would play Mario on an enema for you. Virtual Boy was less about virtual reality and more about stereoscopic 3D visuals, having background elements way in the background and shoving some graphics right in your face. While this aspect of the system worked, it wasn't enough for critics, and Virtual Boy failed to win over attendees at the show. The games were lackluster and frankly not abundant. Many could feel headaches coming on after playing for a bit, and the proposed price tag of around 200 US bones was quite a lot for what was being shown off. Regardless, it was releasing in 1995, so get your face ready. The Virtual Boy was later shown off in the US at the Consumer Electronics Show in January 1995, where more games were announced and shown off, including a demo of a Star Fox title, VB Mario Land, some tech demos, the game's Red Alarm, Vertical Force, known at the time as Shoot 'em Up, and Virtual League Baseball. Guess who wasn't impressed? Nintendo brought the Virtual Boy to various other events throughout 1995, such as E3 and Game Expo, before releasing in Japan on July 21st, 1995, and on August 14th, 1995, here in North America for 180 bones. You know, Nintendo initially projected to sell 3 million units within the first year on the market, and with a $20 million marketing campaign here in the States, no matter what, I think it deserved to sell at least 771K. Damn! The Virtual Boy came packed in this here box. It looks more Magic Eye picture than video game. Oh, it's a piece of shit. The Virtual Boy's marketing was bizarre. Many commercials portrayed it as a B-movie monster with the player running away from it. Reverse psychology, not a bad idea. Oh, don't buy the Virtual Boy, you'll fucking hate it. Seriously, don't buy it, it'll kill you. For the love of God, don't buy it! Some commercials really honed in on the futuristic alternate dimension or reality aspect. Others just treated it like any other game console, which made the fact that the gameplay was all red and black stick out that much more. Sure, when you're trying to sell this on being futuristic, the red and black is jarring, but you could swing it as, in the future when the world ends, these will be the only colors left. A 3D game for a 3D world. That spinning vortex, ominous voice, how could this possibly fail? Well, there's a first problem. This is the Nintendo Virtual Boy. It's red. You know, you gotta hand it to Nintendo, the design of the headpiece isn't too far off from something like the PlayStation VR. The difference is, this rests on your head, this has chicken legs. So Nintendo opted for this design, as putting a head strap on here would be too much of a bother for them. What if a kid is wearing this while walking around and falls on a hungry bear or something? What if the Virtual Boy induces motion sickness or hurts a child's eyes during crucial retina development? What if the Virtual Boy causes them to go blind? We can't have that, then they can't play more Virtual Boy. What if they don't want to take the system off their face? Who wants to live in the real world when you can escape from reality in the Mario Mario's tennis realm. Putting the system on a stand like this sort of forces you to approach it like a quick novelty, almost like a tower viewer. Video game addiction has always been a concern with parents, but it was definitely at a peak back then since it was a newer concept. They probably didn't want to create a system where to play it you had to completely disconnect from reality and zip tie it to your face. So for this design, we can put it on a desk and bend over, or lay on our back and have it spill all over our face. It's like my eyes are being waterboarded. However, it turns out Nintendo was developing a shoulder harness for the system, and I'm sure it would have made next better everywhere. There are two controls on the headset itself, one to adjust the focus of the screen and another to adjust the placement and angle of the eyepieces. The stand can be adjusted as well for ultimate viewing pleasure, but that doesn't stop it from looking incredibly shoehorned on. This thing looks unfinished, like the stand is something your dad would whip together to hold this up. We can remove it from here just like that, and oddly without the stand this looks more natural. Volume slider, headphone jack, a link cable port for multiplayer, and a port for the controller. Now the Virtual Boy's controller is actually pretty good and fairly ahead of its time. We've got these grips, which aren't entirely new. We saw that on the PlayStation controller and on my thighs. But these feel so ergonomic and honestly pretty modern. Two buttons on the back act like normal shoulder buttons, but these really feel like precursors to triggers or even the back buttons on those Pro Line controllers. And two D-pads, which is the most unique thing about this. That's a lie. While barely any games on the system utilize them, this is incredibly forward-thinking for the era. We didn't really have dual analog controllers yet, and the Virtual Boy was one of the first to implement something. All these buttons feel fantastic. Nice sizes, comfortable locations. This is a legitimately good controller. Though I find its mirror design kind of odd, like the start, select, A, and B buttons are all the exact same size and mimic each other on both sides. If any system needed buttons of varying shapes and sizes, it's the Virtual Boy. This is an experience where I can't easily look down to check what button to press. A button layout like the GameCube controller, or something as simple as making some buttons concave and convex like the Super Nintendo's, or even just engraving something into the buttons themselves like on the Nintendo 64s would have made perfect sense. Out of all controllers not to do that, it's bizarre to me it's the one where I physically have the hardest time looking at it during a game. And with prototype versions of this controller, each button was colored differently, which makes even less sense. Hey, hit the yellow button. Well, I can't see the controller. I'm playing the damn game. The unit's powered through the controller too, which is weird. You can't turn this thing on without the controller, even the power button's on it. You can use an AC adapter or 6 AA batteries because Nintendo kept claiming the Virtual Boy was a portable device. So was a house. With 6 AA's, the Virtual Boy lasts roughly 4 hours, which is pretty bad by 1995 Nintendo standards. Many attribute the excellent battery life of the Game Boy to its success, but it could have been more successful if it caused seizures. Nintendo had to cover their ass with this thing, putting as many warnings as possible here. Basically, if you had troubles with nausea, motion sickness, epilepsy, I'm pretty sure your doctor already gave you a list of don't even think about it. Me personally, the Virtual Boy doesn't give me a seizure, it just makes me sad. So what is it like playing one of these? Well, line your eyes up with the two eyepieces and bam! Basically, it looks like a small widescreen display surrounded by black, which, I mean, hey, black is one of the two colors the display can show, so it works. It could look far worse. While looking through, you do see quite a lot of depth with the images. 3D-wise, it's a lot more that's deep in the background than that's right in my face. But I think the 3D looks pretty good for the time, honestly, and the display quality itself is very crisp. The Virtual Boy achieves this by using oscillating mirrors to reflect LEDs on each side of the system for both eyes, allowing for stereoscopic 3-dimensional depth in the visuals. You know, that sounds stupid enough to try 16 years later. Yes, Nintendo revisited the idea of a portable system with stereoscopic 3D later on with the Nintendo 3DS, this time not requiring you to shove your face in anything. Glasses-free 3D was definitely the way to go here, but after trying the Virtual Boy out, these two have a lot more in common than I ever imagined. Much like the 3DS, you can't see the 3D effect on anything but an actual unit. However, if you've ever experienced a 3D effect on a Nintendo 3DS, imagine playing that system in the dark and the game was just in red and black. That's the Virtual Boy. At least with the 3DS, you can turn the 3D off if you want. If you want to turn it off with the Virtual Boy, I don't know, wear an eye patch. Let's move on to the games. They go in the front, like a debit card. They all come with a dust cover, mainly because the connector is completely exposed with this design. Boxes are like this. Square. You know, Nintendo announced loads of Virtual Boy titles, third-party supporters, all that. It was clear they wanted the first year of this system's release to be impactful. Let's call their bluff. I got a stack of Virtual Boy games that released within a year of the launch. Let's give them all a whirl. Yes, let us delve into the world of Virtual Boy with the help of my patented 12-point scale and liquor. Each Virtual Boy game will be rated on a scale from 1 to 12. If you're asking why it goes up to 12, why are you asking about the validity of Virtual Boy review scores? First up is Mario's Tennis, originally known as Mario's Dream Tennis prior to launch. Here in North America, this was bundled in with each Virtual Boy system, which never made much sense to me. Wow, the system is so badass. Did you play the tennis game it came with? Each Virtual Boy game starts off with a warning. No, a plea. I don't care. Even though I'm of age, I still lie about my age on adult websites. Moves on to the Virtual Boy startup screen. This is here for you to adjust the focus or viewing angles prior to starting the game, and afterwards we have to set the automatic pause feature. Every single game does this. Turning this on pauses the game after 15 to 30 minutes to force you to get a life. That's right, Nintendo's been doing that go take a break shtick ever since the Virtual Boy. Stop playing our games, you fucking dork! Mario's Tennis stands out to me as being one of the first legitimate Mario sports games. I'm sure we had Mario featured in some golf games prior to this, but this is the first one to carry Mario's name in the title. We can select between singles or doubles play in a tournament or a single match, choose the difficulty, 1 set or 3 set, pick a Mario character. Wow, tell me more! Mario's Tennis is incredibly basic and bare bones. The characters all pretty much feel like carbon copies of each other. The courts are all the same, with random background elements being the only differences, but even then you can't pick and choose which court you want. You can't even play multiplayer. Not only is it not an option, there was never a Virtual Boy link cable released. They went to all that trouble of making this port. They can't let it go to waste. I keep all my spices here. Weirdly enough, various marketing materials and commercials for Mario's Tennis claim it does have a multiplayer mode, but I refuse to look any further. I don't have anywhere else for my spices. The Virtual Boy link cable may have been canceled, but fans have created their own version. There are no official games that support it, so it's good we aren't spending our time making shit that doesn't matter. What makes Mario's Tennis stand out is the 3D effect. You ever play a tennis game from this era? It's terrifying. It is so difficult to judge where the ball is in relation to your racket. With the Virtual Boy's 3D effect and this specific camera angle, it's so much easier now, and the overall feeling of depth works quite well. The camera angle does make doubles matches a bit weird though, as if I'm closer to the net, I can't see a lick of what my partner's doing back there. It's a perfectly playable tennis game. The problem is, who the hell wanted that as a pack-in for their next-gen virtual reality experience? I get that Mario's Tennis is a Virtual Boy game that definitely benefits from having the 3D effect, so it makes sense to shove it at the forefront, but as a pack-in title? I don't know, it's just not exciting. May I suggest, it's quite boring. Well, that's a great first impression. Not only are my eyes being gouged out, but I'm bored too. Let's move on to another one of the 4 launch titles, Red Alarm. This one's a bit of a technical showcase for the Virtual Boy. While its main selling point was stereoscopic 3D, it could also do a bit of graphical 3D. Wow, a portable system that can do 3D graphics? A system that can do 3D graphics? Well, Red Alarm seems to be a technical showcase for what the Virtual Boy can't do. This is a game very similar to Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. You pilot an aircraft shooting down the enemies. It's pretty self-explanatory. The problem is, I have no clue what I'm looking at. The Virtual Boy couldn't render this many 3D graphics, so due to technical limitations, the developers settled for basic wireframes. Because of that, everything looks the same. The environment, enemies, projectiles, it all blends in. Now, to be fair, when played on an actual unit, the 3D effect does help to distinguish what's a background detail and what's not, but it's still confusing. Sure, the Virtual Boy can do some light 3D stuff like this, but if you have to strip it down this much, I think at that point you should just consider not making this game for the Virtual Boy. If it wasn't for the wireframes, this obviously would have been a pretty impressive game for the time. Plus, there's nothing really wrong with the gameplay, but as it stands, I don't know, man, I just feel like my time is worth more than this. That's right, I'm moving up the totem pole. Teleroboxer. Honestly, if any game should have been a pack-in title, it's this one. Sure, Mario's Tennis is pretty easy for anybody to understand, but Teleroboxer is probably one of the most at-home feeling games on the system. It's played via the first person, uses the 2 D-pads on the controller, the 3D works quite well, and with this perspective, it's pretty effective. The futuristic robot theming works well with the design of the Virtual Boy. This feels like a game for the Virtual Boy. Mario's Tennis and Red Alarm feel like Game Boy and Super Nintendo games that were left out in the sun. It's a pretty good game, incredibly similar to Punch-Out, as you have to find openings to punch your opponent while blocking and dodging at the right moments. The 2 D-pads control each separate fist, and with the overall theming and 3D effect, this feels like the definitive Virtual Boy experience. Not saying this couldn't work on other consoles, but out of most of the system's other games, this feels tailor-made for it. Galactic Pinball, yeah, one of the first titles shown for the Virtual Boy. Initially titled Space Pinball, they settled on Galactic because you're more likely to try something if your friend says, "This shit's galactic." I think a pinball game does make quite a lot of sense on here, considering the static nature of it. Like, when you think about it, if you play the Virtual Boy at a desk, it kind of feels like your own personal arcade cabinet. Plus, the back buttons feel pretty similar to those on a pinball machine, and the 3D effects could be pretty cool. At the end of the day, Galactic Pinball, it's alright in my book. It's pinball in space. They have some fun minigames here and there, like Samus's ship from Metroid appears and you have to shoot at enemies. I do kind of like this one, though much like Mario's Tennis, there's not a lot to it. And that was the full launch lineup in North America. Impressed? Let's hope not, because we have more games to talk about. You don't want to get over impressed. Next up is Virtual League Baseball. They have a whole league for that now?
A few weeks after launch came Virtual League Baseball, or as it's known in Japan, Virtual Pro Yaku 95. They're the exact same games, but the Japanese version has far more cartoony character designs. I'm sure they wanted this to be a more mature, traditional baseball game here in the West, appealing to the everyman. I'm no pussy, I want a realistic baseball game for my one video game console, the Virtual Boy. But were these character designs truly too Japanese or cartoony to where they just had to change every single one? Like, they just have bigger heads and they didn't even change the title screen. They still have the more cartoony character design here. What was the point of any of this? I think changing the box art to this made sense, but changing the sprites in game, I don't know, what's the point? Well, Virtual League Baseball is just baseball, nothing else really to it. 3D does help to judge when you should swing the bat, so yes, this is warranted. Next game to release was Mario Clash, so this is kind of what came of that Mario Bros. VB demo when the Virtual Boy was first revealed. It's a new take on the original Mario Bros. Arcade formula, kind of like Donkey Kong on the original Game Boy. That took the original arcade Donkey Kong and expanded it with a huge single-player campaign, turning it into a puzzle platformer with new moves, mechanics, enemies. It's one of my biggest turn-ons. Mario Clash is more so just another game in the same style of Mario Bros. Arcade. It's all about clearing the level of all enemies. You throw shells at them, but some require you to throw them from the foreground or background. This ends up being more of a chore than a puzzle or challenge, however. Half the time the enemies change direction so much, it's just annoying to constantly line myself up to throw a shell, and I miss, so line myself up again, miss again, line up again, my head's in a fucking tub. Mario Clash is a fine little arcade throwback, but it doesn't hold my attention for long. It definitely feels like it's missing something. This came out after Donkey Kong 94 and follows a similar idea of taking an arcade game and expanding it, but the difference is Donkey Kong 94 adapted itself to the video game system it was on. Mario Clash feels stuck in the arcades. Its gameplay is a test of endurance, not necessarily like a high score arcade type, more so see how patient you can be type. Jack Brothers, easily one of the most expensive Virtual Boy games. That's right, I'm an idiot. Not only is it rare because of low sales, but it's generally considered one of the better Virtual Boy games out there, while also being the only game for the system developed and published by Atlus. It's actually a spin-off of their Shin Megami Tensei franchise, with this being the first game from the series to release outside of Japan. I can totally understand why. If you were Atlus in 1995, what do you think would do better in America? This or this? Well, joke's on you, because you made this one for the Virtual Boy. The game stars the Megami Tensei mascot Jack Frost alongside two other Jack characters. Your goal is to find all the keys in an overhead maze, defeating enemies along the way. Once you get all the keys, you can head for the exit and drop down to the next floor. You repeat the process until you hit a boss fight. It's pretty simple, and the 3D effect is barely there. It's just, ooh, this game has a background. The future is here, fucker! But it's legitimately pretty fun, and the music is great. I'm very happy I spent $2,000 on this. Golf, much like Virtual League Baseball, it's not tennis. This is another very basic traditional sports game. The 3D here doesn't matter at all. At least with the other ones, I felt like hitting the ball was made easier. Here, I gained nothing from this.
It's shocking.
Virtual Boy Wario Land was the big holiday release for the Virtual Boy in 1995, and for good reason. Originally titled Wario Cruise, it's even called that on the Virtual Boy's box itself. Why they settled on Virtual Boy Wario Land, I don't know, but it inspired the name Little Big Planet PS Vita. This released after Wario Land Super Mario Land 3, but before Wario Land 2, so which of these can be considered the true precursor to Wario Land 2, 3, and 4? I assume not the one nobody played. We control Wario exploring a handful of levels. It's a fairly short game, but each area is fun to dig through and uncover secrets. You want to find the key hidden in the level to finish the stage, and we have these awesome power-up pads and bonus games. The level design is excellent here. This is just a fantastic 2D platformer. But of course, Virtual Boy is in the name, so where did the unique properties of the system come into play? You jump into the background sometimes, the boss fights are from this perspective. Well, that stinks. You have this great game that's stuck on the Virtual Boy for no reason. It's like you have a fine steak you have to eat off the shower floor. Panic Bomber, a Bomberman-themed puzzle game. Look at this, and it seems pretty familiar, looking like most other falling block puzzlers out there. This is actually a full-blown series of games, though we wouldn't know that. Panic Bomber games rarely left Japan. In fact, this is pretty much the only one that ever did. The only thing we can play is story mode, which is super weird. There's not even just a single match mode or whatever. If you want to play Panic Bomber, you gotta play story mode. To play, you want to match up like icons, which sends unlit bombs to your opponent's side. When you get a lit bomb, it can detonate the ones piled up from your opponent. First one to fill up their board loses. It's very easy to pick up and play. Now why it's on this thing is beyond me. Who wants to cock their head into a coffin on stilts to play a falling block puzzle game like this that has no worthwhile 3D effect whatsoever? Oh, the background is obviously in the background.
Holy shit!
Vertical Force, one of the most basic names possible for a vertical shooter. That's Super Mario Brothers? Nah, X-axis antics. A pretty generic shoot 'em up where you have targets to shoot at two different planes. You can shift between the background and foreground, which really is the only major thing this game can call its own. Again, much like Virtual League Baseball, it's not tennis. Waterworld, the only movie licensed game to grace the system. What the hell am I looking at? So we have to shoot everything in sight, then move on to the next stage. Huh. Nestor's Bowling. Oh, Nestor's Funky Bowling.
Oh, I am so f***ing ready.
Nestor's Funky f***ing Bowling. Leave it to Nestor to give bowling the funk. Nestor was a character from Nintendo Power magazine, so to see him get his own game is pretty cool. Now, was he an avid enough bowler in the comics he was in to warrant Funky Bowling? I thought this would have been a prime opportunity to put a little Nestor comic in the instruction manual, but no. All it says is he wanted to be in a bowling game. You can play as Nestor or his sister Hester, who only ever appeared in this game. The physics feel weird here, but that's to be expected for a mid-90s bowling game. The pins just don't act like pins, but if you can get over that, it's a serviceable bowling game. I can't. 3D Tetris. Right away, this is probably the most enticing Virtual Boy game to me. Just the idea of Tetris in 3D is kind of intriguing and actually sort of takes advantage of the bane to my life expectancy. I'm pretty sure I'm infertile now. 3D Tetris is played from an overhead perspective, and you do your normal Tetris shtick, but this time you have a whole three-dimensional plane to fill. So basically, instead of trying to clear one line, you have to clear the entirety of the square we see from this perspective. It is quite literally playing Tetris by looking down on the playfield. It's a really cool concept, but I find there to be no real middle ground I'm happy with here. It's either too slow and easy or too fast and confusing. The lower levels are chump change. It's just like, come on, give me some action. What the f was that? The higher levels have Tetris pieces not normally found in regular Tetris games, and it just gets confusing based on how many layers of puzzle pieces we're dealing with here. You flip the pieces around with the dual D-pads, making this another fabled Virtual Boy game to use this thing. In the end, I'd love to see this concept attempted again. I think it has loads of potential, and it's alright here, though I would have liked it if they included a standard Tetris mode on top of the 3D Tetris stuff. Well, next up.
Well, in the process of going through the Virtual Boy's first year of games, I accidentally went through only its first 8 months of games, which in tandem is all of its games. The Virtual Boy lasted from August 1995 to March 1996 in North America, with only 14 releases. But Japan had 8 exclusives. You really think I'd play Waterworld and say no to Space Squash?
First up, V-Tetris. No wonder 3D Tetris only had 3D Tetris. For V-Tetris, play V-Tetris. This is just Tetris, no real advantages to playing it on Virtual Boy. Though the 3D effect that happens when you clear Tetris is pretty neat, kinda right in your face. There's a mode that involves an entire cylinder of Tetris going on, and you can rotate around it, which is a concept that appears in Pokemon Puzzle League on Nintendo 64. This is Tetris, but with an extra letter. Space Squash! Honestly, I was expecting a 2D shooter, but what I got was Connect Adventures. Now, this is a cute concept that takes advantage of Virtual Boy. Imagine Pong, but from a 3D perspective with limbs. Cute game, not much more than that. Virtual Fishing, a fishing game on Virtual Boy. It's not tennis. Innsmouth no Yakata. Now, this is an experience. One of the most unique titles on the console. A first-person survival horror game. It uses both D-pads, works surprisingly well, and for a console like this, what better game to play on it than a first-person survival horror? I wouldn't put this game in the same league as something like Virtual Boy Wario Land. That was a legitimately good game regardless of the system it was on. But Innsmouth no Yakata is an extremely cool novelty that deserves more attention. Space Invaders Virtual Collection. Is there anybody who's a legitimate fan of Space Invaders? Anybody? Well, here's the first 2 games on Virtual Boy. You can play part 1 and part 2 as they usually play, or try a brand new version with a slightly tilted 3D perspective. This game cost me $500. And now we have the final 3 Virtual Boy games that I just flat out don't own. It's cause I'm not good enough. Virtual Lab is an intestine puzzle game. You have to connect the intestines, that's about it. This game was rushed out the door. You get passwords to save your progress, yet there is no password input screen. I did not feel like spending $2 grand. I already bought Waterworld for $500. Virtual Bowling. This one I would consider unofficially the rarest Virtual Boy game, considering I can't find a single copy for sale. It doesn't help that many just assume you're talking about Nestor's Funky Bowling, but there's nothing funky about this one. It's a very similar game in the sense that it is also a bowling game on Virtual Boy. It's not bad, but what else can I possibly say? It isn't f***ing tennis. finally, SD Gundam Dimension War. I'm gonna speak for me here and say this isn't really my thing. A tactical role-playing game. Out of all games to make with giant robots on Virtual Boy, a tactical role-playing game. At least there's big action scenes when you fight opponents, and back to chess. Can you tell the system was rushed? Nintendo released Virtual Boy before it was properly finished. Gunpei Yokoi was not pleased that they decided to release it in this state. And when the system itself wasn't finished, it's a miracle most of the games are as tolerable as they are. None of them outside of Wario Land are really anything to write home about, but I honestly think the Virtual Boy has a pretty quality library overall. Just none of them are worth going through all of this. It's an awkward system to play, and when the games are mostly simple high score based ones, or games that play like anything on a Super Nintendo or Game Boy that truly gain nothing from the Virtual Boy's gimmick, it makes playing it that much more annoying. The 3D is alright though, and I do think the rumors that it'll make you go blind for most people is untrue. I think at the most, it can just be a bit hard on your eyes. But combine all of this, the unfinished system, games that, well, fine, nobody really cared about, a gimmick that wasn't thought through and not utilized properly, this number makes so much sense. Nintendo discontinued the Virtual Boy incredibly quickly. This system was always seen by them as something to put on the market and nothing more. But that doesn't mean they didn't try, and that nobody likes this thing. So many canceled projects. BB Mario Land, a traditional Mario platformer, a GoldenEye 007 racing game, a port of Donkey Kong Country 2, various other projects like Bound High. This game leaked online. You can play it, and this would have been lovely on the system. It actually utilizes the 3D and is a unique and fun little action puzzle game. Dragon Hopper by Intelligent Systems, a traditional Bomberman game, Virtual League Baseball 2, Worms, Star Fox, and F-Zero spin-off Zero Racers. They were given it an actual go, and then they realized this thing was beyond saving. But fans still really like this thing. The homebrew community is pretty wild. They made games to actually use the fan-made link cable. Now, do they actually like this thing, or do they like it because it makes them quirky?
The Virtual Boy is a prime example of what happens when Nintendo just thinks of a gimmick and rolls with it before thinking up any worthwhile uses for it. But it's not that bad. I think the 3D effect works okay, and the games themselves are inoffensive. While they aren't gonna light the world on fire and are too simple and basic, they work fine. They aren't anything crazy, but they're fun enough. The problem is, barely any of the games are good enough to warrant shoving your head in this thing for over 15 minutes. And when they are, they're games that would work better on normal-ass game consoles. But in the end, I don't hate this thing. In fact, I think it's a bit misunderstood. It's not good, but it's better than my cousin Betty.